everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is S.Y. Lin, and we're here with Jordan Martins today. Jordan Martins is a Chicago-based visual artist, curator, educator, and musician. He received his MFA in visual arts from UFBA in Salvador, Brazil in 2007, and he's a lecturer at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and Loyola University. He is the executive director of Conversation, a multidisciplinary art space in Chicago. Martin's visual work is based on a collage process, including painting, photography, video, and installation. And he has exhibited nationally and internationally. Please welcome Jordan.
Thanks so much, SY, and thanks to Mana and to the Molira Foundation. Good to see some familiar faces and some unfamiliar ones. Thanks for coming. I'm going to talk about my work as an artist and Comfort Station. I try to usually tie them together for a few reasons. I think one, it's important for Chicago-based artists who wear multiple hats to foreground their artistic practice when they're talking about their arts admin practice. Some of my favorite artists in Chicago are people who run spaces, who are curators, who are gallerists, who are other administrators, and I think foregrounding that their work is important. But also in this case, I do like to think about the ways in which my work at Comfort Station has stemmed from my practice, is informed by my practice, and helps me understand Comfort Station. So I'm going to start off with just showing some of my sort of recent processes and then head towards my work at Comfort Station. Recently, I've been mostly working in a kind of a flow chart of making photo still lifes in my studio, arranging them in different ways, creating different permutations, and then printing these out, painting on them, recollaging them, and running them through a scanner process and creating some movement. And I'm interested in the kind of the ongoing proliferation of imagery that comes from that process, and the way these image sequences become like cousins, where the same pieces can be manifested in different scans, different sort of genetic variants of the same imagery and content. These get printed out as finished single edition prints. I call my series Phenotypes, but they also get printed onto canvas and serve as a starting point for mixed media painting processes. And in this work, I'm generally very interested in thinking about different processes and principles. I'm very interested in camouflage and conspicuousness, a conspicuous display, standing out versus hiding. I'm interested in figure and ground, signal and noise questions. I'm interested in hallucination and Gestalt psychology, fugue structures, which are from music where you have sort of simultaneous lines of melodies happening and a listener has to kind of track all the lines and find the whole. I'm interested in the interconnection to these things. I'm interested in multiplicity, and promiscuity is a word I'm using just to reference the fact that images kind of keep on spilling out from the same processes. And reiterative looping, and again, all the interconnections of these things. But to me, really, collage is the main guiding principle of the work. And to me, collage, personally, in my practice, it's different for different artists, but it boils down to a few different things. Collaging to me is oftentimes organizing disparate elements into an organic whole. To me, the origin of collage, my practice, it was about pulling one image from one magazine and then finding another photograph that was unrelated and tearing them apart and finding some serendipitous joining together, a surprise or a synthesis that was unanticipated. And it's also about allowing emergent forms to develop and resonate together. So I loved not knowing what was going to happen, not knowing what that final form was going to be, and allowing it to kind of permeate the process and let it be discovered. And to me, again, multiplicity is a big part of this. Part of why I like looking at collages is no matter how they're stitched together, you're constantly kind of seeing multiple suggestive forms, and your brain and your eyes are having to kind of tune in what's there. So the paintings are oftentimes also pushing that, thinking about multiplicity, asking a viewer to look at these forms and get a little lost in them, but also kind of take an active role in tuning in what the form is. And so you can see that sort of the fragments of the phenotypes in the background become the background starting point for these paintings, and I'll deposit some other forms and try to see where it goes in reaction to that initial deposit. So it's very much, to me, a collage process still. Here's some more phenotypes. This is a show I did at Goldfinch in 2019. I called it Plant Strategies, which is a term from biology that talks about how plants have developed and evolved certain traits and forms as a kind of a trade-off. Like they can have bigger leaves and catch more sunlight, but they have to expend more energy to grow the leaves. So they might have patterns or spots or stripes that have evolved to evade certain predators, but it might attract others. And I like that as a model for painting, that we're constantly trying to kind of balance a set of trade-offs for a certain kind of visual expression. And it was a fun pun, plants and paint. But I'm partly showing this to also show a smaller exhibition that I curated in the back called Animal Tactics, where I invited five artists. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 artists to do a show that was kind of a collage onto my show, plants and animals, strategies, tactics, and also a collaging together. I was coming up with the idea of animal tactics as just a language game off of plant strategies, and I allowed that to guide the choices of the artists I used, most of whom had some reference to animal imagery, somewhat randomly, but in very different ways. And that itself, to me, is also a kind of collage where you're joining together disparate practices and seeing what forms emerge together. Other works of mine, I've done installation work. This is a piece I did at Mission Projects called How Easy is a Bush of Hair, which was about inviting viewers into a hallucinatory space to kind of track their own senses as these disparate videos played around them. I've also done another work in this series called Stay Out, Come In, Stay In, Come Out, playing on a structure of a barricade, which is supposed to keep people out, but on the inside of the structures, there were also benches inviting you to come in. And thinking about the structures as modular building blocks that could be arranged either to heighten the stay out or the invitation to come in. The patterns were influenced by dazzle camouflage, which was a short-lived technique sort of pre-radar in World War I, where battleships were painted with bold stripes because they couldn't be hidden, they couldn't be camouflaged. But the stripes could disrupt the viewer's ability to read how large it is or what direction it was flowing in. So these were trying to kind of create a collapse of function and visual form. And they were really also about inviting other people to do performances inside them. So again, making the work as an expression of my own ideas, but more importantly, creating a context for other programs and other artists to do sort of supplementary or activations or performances. Here's one more iteration at a different location. And lastly, before I get into Comfort Station, I wanted to show a show I curated in 2018 at Chicago Artists Coalition, where I was invited to curate this showcase of Chicago artists, and I chose to lean into the idea of collage as a curatorial concept Arguably all curatorial concepts are a kind of a collage, but I was trying to kind of press it more directly. And I used the idea of a mixtape as a form. Mixtapes were a foundational kind of collage in my youth. And I asked different artists to be involved with the premise that their work would be shown without the polite distance that most group shows usually use or have to use. I said your work would often be touching other work or be brought into conversation with work quite directly, overlapping at times. It's a big ask to makeup artists because they make work with a certain intention. And I was very interested in asking them to let their work speak and bounce off of other artists' work in ways that might be beyond what they were conceiving of. And I don't want to say I was surprised, but I was really grateful and blown away by how every single artist was so excited to do this. They were so thrilled to see their work, literally touching someone else's work, bouncing off of it. They were so excited to show up and see what was done, to see the arrangements of the space. This is one of my favorites where we have Dan Devening, again, another curator, gallery owner, who's also an amazing artist in Chicago. He offered up a few collage mixed media works, and I paired it with this wonderful photograph by Marjane Abrahamic, and we noticed that there's this painting in the background of the photograph that looks like a lot like a Dan Devening work. And to me, again, these are the kind of the surprises that I like to seek out in my curatorial work. Lastly, this is just a graphic to kind of illustrate a fugue structure in music. This is a Baroque musical form that Bach is mostly well known for. And the idea is that these melodies are introduced and they kind of run through a certain sequence of melodic movements, then they sort of restart, and then another melody is happening on top of it. And these two melodies can actually be conceived of as independent melodic ideas that happen to line up. So as you move horizontally across the score, you'll see they're kind of operating differently, but certain notes at certain positions will start to line up and create harmonies that play on a viewer's, or on a listener's, I think, ability to kind of track the multiplicity of voices that become a whole. And I raise this as a kind of a model before we start looking at Comfort Station. Because I see Comfort Station as a kind of a mass collage. I see it as a multiplicity. I see it as a kind of a fugue, where every single melodic voice of programmer that's doing things there is in their own world. We want the film programmers to make their film programming as an independent entity. It's completely separate from the music program and the exhibition program. There are times when there are really sort of overt collaborations, but most of the time we want these independent entities just to kind of like create their own melodies and see what form emerges together. So our mission is to activate a historic building with public, community-driven programs that foster vibrant connections at the intersection of art and life. We operate in a historic building that was built, I think, in 1927. There were about a dozen identical buildings built out across the boulevard system in Chicago, I think extending from Logan Square all the way down into Columbus Park, at the edge of the city with Oak Park. And only two buildings remain. Ours and the one in Columbus Park, which I always do a double take when I drive past there because it looks identical to our building. This was slated to be demolished, but a local preservation group lobbied to have it saved, landmarked, and renovated. But they had no clear idea of what to do with it. And it kind of fell into the hands of some local artists who were just looking for a place to hang their work temporarily. They did a little pop-up exhibition. They borrowed the keys to the building and essentially never returned the keys. From that point on, the Preservation Society gave that first group of people carte blanche to program things in the space. And I was brought in as one of the first exhibiting artists in that, more official capacity. And I quickly was interested in curating a series of concerts. Someone else came in and pitched a series of film. Someone else came in and wanted to do some workshops. And pretty quickly we were operating as this multidisciplinary space as of 2012. So again, I'll reiterate here, to me, the principles of collage and how they would apply to an organization. It's organizing disparate elements into an organic whole. It's allowing emergent forms to develop and resonate together without predicting and planning every single part of it. And it's about multiplicity. So a few years in, I started to think it's not an accident that I find myself in this space. It's actually quite telling that I was drawn to doing work in this kind of environment, and that the same inclinations and skills I developed as an artist were maybe a good fit for this. So today we have core programs of monthly exhibitions, weekly concerts, weekly film screenings. We have an outdoor installation project space called Scaffold. We have a lecture series called Soapbox, run by our artistic director, Katie Roth. We have special projects like the Day of the Dead project, a performance project called Force in Motion, and others. We have collaborations with a whole host of people and organizations in the city. And then we also have just outside programs and partnerships. We have people that have needed a space and are just simply looking for a place to plug into it. So, this is our 12th year of operating, and as we've evolved and developed ways of working, myself and the other people involved tend to see this as an ongoing experiment. How can the space be used? How can we do a variety of things in the space? How can we activate this public space? For us, that means actually doing a lot. This is a public building, it's city-owned. Every event is free because it's city-owned, and it seems unethical to try to create a barrier for anyone to access it. But it also means we think there should be a lot of things happening. If this were a public fountain, we'd want it, running water as much as possible. And that means relying on a network of volunteers to run a bunch of these programs. We were 100% volunteer run until the last few years, I'll say. And part of what I'm thinking through now is this transition from a volunteer-run organization to a partially salaried staff organization. And how do you square the reality of volunteer labor and paid labor, which I'll come back to if I have time. So again, these are just some images to show the wide array of experiences we've tried to bring into the space and onto the lawn. We try to not let anything get broken, especially the artwork, but we also, if a curator or programmer wants to do something that's a little stretching out, a little extra, we try to say yes and allow people to conceive of the space in different ways and really trust everyone involved. And that also extends to the fact that the number of people in the city that have the combo to get into the front door is pretty vast. It's a trust network of you have access to this building, please don't mess it up, and please be responsible with it when you lock up. We have community partners in the area that are housing advocates, activists who are trying to combat gentrification and displacement, and other community groups who we let use the space. That's not a program that's on our calendar. It's more of just a way to sort of give the space over to these other functions. This is a potluck we had with Logan Square Neighborhood Association, which is now called Palenque Logan Square Neighborhood Association. They're one of our longest standing and I think most important partners in the community. And this is from an event called the Power Project we did with, for 3 years in partnership with the Arts Leaders of Color Network, which is now a dissolved entity. It was sort of a temporary entity that was made up of various curators and programmers in the city, BIPOC curators, emerging curators, run by Brett Swinney, who's now at DCASE. So again, the multiplicity of functions here is often not about what we decide to do, but who wants to do something in the space and how we can facilitate them having access to the space. I don't always love having loud bands in the space because it tends to bring a certain energy that makes me nervous about the artwork on the wall, but it happens. This is actually during a month where we had no exhibition for this program we call Force in Motion. The idea was, let's just not have art on the walls for a whole month, and that would give us a little more leeway to invite a broader range of things in the space. Because we had noticed when we had a concert of a pretty loud metal band in the space once for this performance, all of a sudden, these like Latinx teenagers from the neighborhood were just coming out of the woodwork. They heard it when they came over. It's a community we wanted to be relevant to. Like, we want the local kids, especially in the Latinx community, to like see this as theirs. But our outreach had not really worked, and then you just have a loud band play. The local teens are going to be thrilled. So we thought, let's do a whole program over a whole weekend where we invite Latinx-led, usually like punk and metal bands to play some shows as a way of activating the space in that way. Here's some more exhibition shots. And then, as of 2021, we were trying to conceive of how to work outside more. This lawn next to our building had always been this area of possibility, but with doing so much inside, we couldn't really afford the energy to kind of do things outside as well. Suddenly, we couldn't do things inside for about a year or more. And we commissioned a local architecture firm called Via Arquitectos y Diseñadores to propose some sort of platform, or I said, kind of like a scaffolding of sorts for performances or artists to adapt things to. And they liked the poetic and functional reference of an actual scaffold. So they designed and implemented this structure we now call scaffold. And you can kind of see it. This is one piece of it. It's reminiscent of the house structure of the building, but with sort of empty, negative space that allows for artists to attach to it different ways. This is by Chema Scandal. He silk screened on these panels he brought back from Mexico the phrase "you are here" in various languages. This was from a great collaborative performance where a group of artists were thinking about sort of domestic and mundane activities inside buildings and performing it in this structure on the lawn. We also were able to do a now annual Day of the Dead celebration because of this structure with Palenque Logan Square Neighborhood Association as the partner. Because this structure allowed us to kind of invite artists to come in and hang and build and suspend different works from it. And this has become one of, I think, our most important projects of our history, thinking about the history of the neighborhood, the ongoing displacement of Latinx communities in Logan Square. And one of the things that we've learned is there's a lot of hand-wringing in the arts about the role that artists play in gentrification and displacement. It sometimes, I think, doesn't go beyond the level of culpability and kind of like flogging ourselves for it, and not getting to, I think, the more important layer of this, which is that having a concrete connection to affordable housing movements in your neighborhood is the most important thing to do. Developers and real estate-based capitalism coming into these neighborhoods, that's what's creating gentrification. Artists are yes, you can chart them as part of the process, and we should be aware of our role here. But let's not overstate our own power in a capitalist society in terms of what the overarching dynamics are. So for us, linking up with folks like Logan Square Neighborhood Association, who are doing the most important work in the neighborhood for that. We always want to kind of make our space available, do kind of events that can kind of signal boost their efforts or create context for their efforts. And what they told us in recent years is actually cultural celebration of the Latinx community, the Mexican American community, is an important role that we can help play in their efforts. So rather than doing just rallies and organizing around affordable housing, having a cultural activity in the center of the square around the Day of the Dead, and showing these communities and these residents that this is their space plays an important role in that work. So we've tried to just create more space for that to happen, and as we've gotten more resources and higher budgets, allocating the budgets towards these kinds of programs. And lastly, I'll say, as part of the ongoing experiment of conversation, I'm thinking about this, what is the social formation, all the volunteers, all the people, all the partners, all the audience members, all the communities around our building. How do our activities and our resources and our principles and our budgets, create structural conditions for certain things to happen? And early on, I think some of the kind of chaotic magic of Comfort Station as a grassroots DIY weird collage with a lot of uncertainty came about because we had no resources really. We weren't paying rent, so that's a resource, but we had no positive cash flow to kind of throw into paying artists, paying ourselves. We would ask for donations as a way to pay the artists we were working with, and that's built up quite a bit. We've now, we're in our 12th year, and as of last year, I started drawing a part-time salary, and we also split my job in two and hired an artistic director. And in part because I realized I will move on at some point from this role. And when I do that, we do a search, we can't ask somebody to take this over for volunteer labor. Now hiring, executive director, compensation, nothing. So we try to build the budgets up and create some pay equity in terms of the folks that are running this are going to start getting paid something. But we still have a vast network of people who are getting paid honoraria and stipends for their programming, but they're not salaried employees. And we're trying to kind of balance what I'll call the gift economy of a DIY and grassroots ethos and sort of origin with the need for pay equity as a structural kind of component of, I think, the arts ecosystem right now. And acknowledging that we can't have everyone clock in for all their work and get paid a certain hourly rate for all their work. And actually, most of our people find that terrifying, that like their role at Comfort Station would suddenly be quantified and they have to start tracking their hours. So we're wrestling with this. How do you incorporate pay equity into these situations? Realizing also that, as currently as a director, as a white man, I'm getting that salary, but really it's creating a structure that creates more possibility for us to hire BIPOC people into our organization when we move on. Because with the racial wealth gap in our country the way it is, who can afford to volunteer more often than not? It's white people, right? So creating pay equity but not losing the gift economy of a volunteer organization is something that's quite complicated. And I also see as part of our ongoing experiment to figure out how we arrange these relationships, these resources, these invitations, these asks, these communities. So I'll end it there, and I guess open it up for questions.
I'm wondering if you could expand on your interest in multiplicity.
As an artist, yeah, so I think I'm just drawn to multiplicity as an experience. I'm drawn to musical experiences where there's a lot of layers and different elements happening, and as a listener or a viewer, I have to sort of surf those waves. I love listening to like large form improvising ensembles. I like looking at complex visual work where I can't just take it all in quickly. It relies on me to kind of, again, surf through it and find my way through it. I think it's because I have ADHD. I don't know. Maybe it's like there's something in my brain that is just drawn to these things as an experience to kind of ground myself. And I know it's a lot of folks share that they're attracted to it. For me, though, as an artist, as I try to create more forms that have multiplicity, it helped me almost have a diagnostic tool for seeing multiplicity in the world. Looking at a cityscape, looking at a community, looking at a set of identities or a set of processes, looking at economic forces, how these things kind of converge and form things. I became very fascinated in how visions and ideas of multiplicity in a creative context help you see those things in the world. We're constantly surrounded by multiplicities. That begins with the perceptual level. That our sense organs are bringing in an unbelievably wide gamut of information, and our brain is having to kind of, filter that and structure it. That's just running in the background of our brain every single millisecond. So I think for me, that's where I kind of got the interest in how these things in a creative practice can be almost projected outward onto the world, if that makes sense.
How do artists or curators get to put up an exhibition?
A conversation. So in this sort of multiplicity model that we have, there's several inputs depending on what you want to do and how you want to do it. Our exhibitions inside the space are curated through an open call every year. So late summer this year, we'll have an open call. We have 10 exhibitions to fill for the next year. We got 300 applications last year. I would have been happy with anyone in the top 100. They were all phenomenal. I mean, actually, beyond that, it was really a wealth of talent. So if you want to do an exhibition in there, the open call. If you want to play a show, there's a submission form for our comfort music page. If you want to do a film screening, go to that page. If you want to do anything else outside those bounds, there's a general submission form on our website, and we have a team of people. After this, I'm going to a meeting with a new team we're forming that is set up to vet, approve, and host those outside submissions. So again, if it doesn't conflict with our existing structures and it's a creative thing, we're trying to say yes. I will say right now, the scaffold structure is kind of the Wild West. We don't have a formal submission system. We might eventually. We kind of need to solidify a budget line so we can offer a set thing for every artist who gets approved. But right now, you can just, through the submission form, pitch an idea, and we'll take a look at it. Thank you, everybody.